Item 22, request for approval of authorized budget appropriation transfers for the flood control district and certain county departments.
Yes, would like to discuss it.
And that, why would you like to discuss that item, Commissioner Ramsey?
How budget transfers are done, the process.
What specifically about budget transfers?
I received a memo from budget on a certain item that I won't name that was kind of odd. And so I want to understand what is the criteria for things going on the budget and what things that aren't on the budget. So that'll be the discussion point.
Yeah, the issue is you're raising a lot of allegations of impropriety as regards me. And so I would like for you to present whatever evidence you have or whatever it is that you're claiming here in open court, because
No, I
a lot of
clear.
allegations
I
coming.
was just very clear with the, let me read the, if you're asking for me to read the email now, I'll read it. This is an email from budget management. So my question is to budget management, not to your office, Judge. The 824 budget transfer list will include, I won't name, an issue. Normally, this unnamed issue would be an agenda item describing an agreement, but we don't want to draw any attention. So I just need to understand from the budget office what ends up being normal and what ends up being not normal in terms of being on the agenda.
I think it's important to note what the unnamed issue is, Commissioner, so it's clear what it is that you're challenging.
I was told by the county attorney I couldn't say it.
Well, I will tell you, and I know Christian Menifee is on, but if you won't say it, I will say it, and it's that the commissioner is getting in the way of a funding transfer for our security detail, the folks that provide security for me personally. And I would like to tell you, Commissioner, that as pertains whatever allegations you're trying to make about this transfer, that we may disagree on the best way to tackle the crime rate, that we may disagree on taxes, that we may disagree on transportation, but the security and security threats of all of us on court, of your colleagues, should be beyond politics. And I cannot tell you the number of threats, comments that go beyond the pale, beyond the standard of disgruntled community members that my staff and myself receive and have received, especially since issues became overly politicized in the recent months and years. And we've seen what that politicization has led to. And it's gone beyond the pale to the point that it became necessary for the first time for my position to have a security detail. It was at the urging of law enforcement that my position was assigned a security detail because they saw it as a necessity. And they saw it as a necessity to put a budget transfer on the agenda. And for good reasons, which you might imagine, and I think any law enforcement person could explain to you, materials related to threat and security don't go on the public agenda. This is serious, Commissioner. Commissioner Ellis just had a man charged with issuing a terroristic threat toward him last week. And so I think it's important to remember that, certainly from my part, if there was anything to do, if there is or if there were to be anything related to the security of you, Commissioner Ramsey, or any of my colleagues on court, any public official for that matter, I would not get in the way.
Well, my question, Judge, was simply the process. Is it only security items that we don't put on the agenda? Are there other items we don't put on the agenda? So I was prepared to discuss this generically. And certainly I share your concern about security, your security, our security. But I had a neighbor down the street Friday night a week ago, went out for carry out on Westheimer. He was coming back. He was surrounded by a motorcycle gang. They shot into his car. They burst an artery in his leg. He bled out and died as he talked to his wife. That person had a 12-year-old daughter, and I'm concerned about our security. I'm concerned about security in the neighborhoods. So that is the number one issue on the table today, is crime and security. My question related to this was simply process related. Is the county administrator, what other issues don't end up being on the agenda because of other reasons? And if this is only security, if that's the only one, then fine, I understand that.
And if I can jump in really quickly, and I apologize for not being on the camera. There's a lot going on right now, but two things here. One, I appreciate that we kind of got that initial blurb out, but moving forward, I think we need to keep it more general, because the agenda item that has been noticed doesn't address any specific budgetary transfer. So let's keep it general. And then two, to the extent it were to be properly noticed, this is a conversation that is typically held for executive session. So I think that, proceeding on this agenda item, if we are going to talk about it, then we should keep the conversation limited to the scope of what's on the agenda item, which is, the processes for deciding to put something on the Commissioner's Court agenda or doing a budget transfer outside of that process.
And that's where I don't understand what this has to do with Commissioner Ramsey's neighbor being shot, unless he's insinuating that because there's a crime that I should not have security.
Not saying anything about your security.
Ramsey, we can disagree on the approach to counter crime, and I've done plenty, but you should not politicize a security detail. And if you have questions about procedure, you can call my office, or you can call the budget director.
And I had the same conversation with.
Appropriate to politicize and to put an item on the agenda getting in the way of security for the county judge of your county, who just so happens to be a woman, and you well know the threats I receive. If you have questions about procedure, you can pick up the phone. I know you can call Christian Menifee, you can call Dave Barry, or you can call my office. And I wonder, and perhaps this is a question for Commissioner Garcia, is this, as law enforcement Commissioner Garcia, does it make sense? Does Commissioner Ramsey have any kind of technical knowledge that allows him to question? Is it standard procedure to question specific threats or need for security of specific members, whether it be in executive session or in public?
Judge, first, let me just say to you that I am aware of some of the challenges that you've been up against. And I just want to thank you for your strength, your courage, and the fact that you have not let it deter you from the important work of protecting our county and protecting our citizens and leading us. And so I just want to say that first. Secondly, I know that Commissioner Ramsey is engineer by training and trade, but beyond that, I know he's a law enforcement advocate. I cheer for the Texans, I cheer for the Astros, I cheer for the Rockets, but I'm not a professional athlete. Some may even question whether I'm even athletic. But to that extent, that's where my expertise on those sports begins and ends. I am a audience to them. And to this extent, let me just say that we have gone throughout my time as sheriff. And look, Judge Emmett did ask me for security detail not because of any threat. He just thought, well, if the mayor's got one, I ought to have one too. And I authorized it, and it lasted all of maybe a few months while he dealt with the blowback of his colleagues. But there was no threat at that time. There are real threats today for a lot of different reasons. And so we have gone through great lengths to protect Harris County, whether it be on cybersecurity, whether it's on physical security, and on some of the most delicate matters. We have been very, very thoughtful about how these things are discussed and where they're discussed for obvious reasons. We never want to let cyber terrorists know what our vulnerabilities are. We don't want to let insurgents know what our physical vulnerabilities are. And we obviously do not want to let anyone who may contemplate a horrible act know what our vulnerabilities are. For that reason, we always work to protect this information and discuss it and handle it in the most discreet matters. Every item I've ever seen and have been familiar with have always been handled with the county attorney's office involved, budget office involved, always being dealt with in the most proper and legal way. Contrast to when I was asked for a security detail, I just assigned someone, didn't even think to ask for a budget transfer. But this is something that is being done in the most above board and legal way I have ever seen such an item being handled.
Yes, Commissioner Ellis.
Mr. County Attorney, do you feel comfortable with us discussing this item anymore, or should we wait and put something on the agenda? Just want to ask before I weigh in.
As I previously mentioned, the way that the item has been noticed, I don't think it's specific enough to have this conversation. That said, I provide the legal advice, and you all take with it what you will. But I don't believe that the notice was specific enough to get into this conversation. And if it is properly noticed, I believe it's a conversation that's proper for executive session. But that said, what the Open Meetings Act says is it doesn't have to be an open meeting. So you all can decide if you want to have the conversation out in public or in executive session. That's really your prerogative. But it hasn't.
I'm deciding to have a conversation out in public because the public should know that one of the commissioners is questioning this, that's what he's doing. And Commissioner, I'm quite generous. I'm quite pleasant. I'm quite patient. But you're crossing a line.
So, Judge, what I'm also suggest is
nobody owes you a line item of the threats that I and my team face.
You know, it's interesting. It's interesting when I ask a budget question, how I'm being political. But when it's a different position from you, Judge, it's not political. So I did not ask the question for political reasons. I asked the question to understand the process through the budget office of what ends up being on this agenda or not.
Do you recognize that security detail is something sensitive? Do you, when there are threats, is it all published? Is this discussed at City Council? Was this discussed in the previous court, the specific threats? Any person off the street can tell you, and I'd again defer to my law enforcement colleague here, but my suspicion is any person off the street can tell you that things related to threat and security are not something that's discussed in a public forum. In fact, it's not something that's discussed outside of the law enforcement agency, Commissioner, because you don't have knowledge about this, nor expertise, and it's a very serious thing. And so I know you have common sense. And when you see this and you say, wait a minute, this has to do with security, if you're acting in good faith, you would pick up the phone and you would call and ask, hey, county attorney, hey, budget director, hey, county administrator, hey, Judge Hidalgo. I call you often, Commissioner. You would call and say, explain to me the process. Explain to me the process. And then it would be explained. If you weren't trying to politicize this, you wouldn't put an item on the agenda. That's pretty obvious. I do want to let Commissioner Ellis finish.
So, Judge, what I want to suggest is that the county attorney lists something for the next meeting that we have in a couple of weeks for executive session. And I don't want to cross the line, but, you know, for all of us, we want to make sure we're safe. And I guess I've been in office longer than any of us here. Usually it's the ones that don't call. I found law enforcement tell me, they said, hey, I worry about the ones who call. They said, worry about the ones who don't call. But so Mr. Menifee, if you would, and I wanted for executive session, if somebody decides for whatever reason, they want to come out and say it in public. But look, all of us want to be safe. And we are in an environment where even some of our colleagues, we're in that season where you can, you know, I've had to have some security, obviously, and we have budgets and pay for it, by the way, since somebody put my home address out in a campaign ballot. It wasn't necessarily my opponent that paid for it, but I know I was paid for it, but I had to live with that. I've been in politics a long time. I know as Ann Richards told me one, it's a chicken ass business. So I can deal with that. But we ought to have something on the agenda. Judge, I don't want to cross the line here. But Mr. Menifee, if you would, for when we come back, because I want to make sure everybody is safe, not just the commissioners who have these budgets, but we can pay for it out of our budgets.
Yep, 10-4, Commissioner.
Yes, Commissioner Cagle. You may be on mute, Commissioner.
Commissioner, our county attorney, Counsel Menifee, you have often called me a stickler on the Open Meetings Act. I have 3 points in this process, 2 of which are very supportive of the judge, one of which may be an explanation of a question that is coming from my colleague with regard to transparency with Commissioner Ramsey. Is it your counsel to me to hold my 3 points since we've had a lot of voice on the subject?
I know that you tend to be an overly stickler for the rules, Commissioner Cagle. You know, my advice remains consistent that this item that was noticed is not specific enough to have this discussion. You know, that said, we are where we are in the conversation already, so I'll defer to you on that.
With that statement, I'm going to be consistent, and I'm not going to make my comments. But here's my next issue. I want to talk to my colleague, Commissioner Ramsey, about this, but also want to call up and talk to my judge about this. But I understand with our Open Meetings Act, I only get to use my Barney Fife bullet once. And so I think that I will call you, Judge, with your permission, and maybe I can add a little extra light in there from my experience from when I was a judge and had cases that involved contentiousness every now and then. And so with all due respect to Commissioner Ramsey, I think I'll use my Barney Fife bullet when this is all over with to call you, Judge Hidalgo, if you will accept my call.
Yeah, always, Commissioner, of course.
Give me a ring too, please, Commissioner.
Yeah, and I've not spoken to any member of court about this. So there's this items. So the recommendation of Commissioner Ellis is that an item come to the next agenda to discuss security for the members of court writ large. That makes sense. The question is, does there still need to be a discussion to micromanage the security I receive in executive session or whatever?
Judge, I'd like to move that item. I'd like to move that item.